So in this video, I'm going to show you how I made the upper cabinets for this built-in. If you've been following along, all the previous videos pretty much fleshed out the entire base. It's time for the upper cabinets. Even though these are bigger, they go much faster because doors are faster, for myself at least, to make than drawers. So the way I like to make cabinets in general is I have a rabbet joint in the back. I do a 1/2 inch back around these built-ins that really helps with transporting them. Nothing really moves on me. For all of the shelves and the tops and the bottoms, the top and the bottom are sometimes a dado joint, sometimes a rabbet joint, but all the shelves are always dado joints. Then I like to put an integrated tongue on the front of all of my ply, and that will receive my poplar face frame, which has a groove. Now the title of this says proper. That's just proper for my shop. You can really build these however you want to. This is just the way I like to do it, especially like I said with transporting these big cabinets. I find they always stay true, bringing them onto site. I like that they dry fit together nicely, and I just find that all the joints make for a sturdier cabinet, but make things the way that you want to make them. So to start this process, because I already have the drawing, I basically can go through and just map out where I need to put all of those joints onto my pieces of ply. I already had these ripped down because when I did the bottom cabinets, I ripped all of my pieces. But basically, as you can see, there's just marks for the I'm calling all of these shelves, even though there's a top and a bottom. And then as you saw in the drawing, they have one shelf on the side because the window is not centered in the room. So they kind of have this weird 15-inch space on either side. On the bottom of this built-in, we just added some drawers. On the top, it's going to be open shelving. So technically, I'm making 3 units. They're all going to be the same depth. The face frame's going to be the same sort of application, but the spacing's different. So I'm cutting 4 sets, two sets, 4 sides, and then another two sides, which will be one different set. The way I do these, if they're not super wide, which these aren't, they're only about 12 inches, I can do them on the radial arm saw. Put my dado stack in there, get it perfect so it's the same thickness as my ply. And as you can see, I just have a scrap piece of wood down there. I have my original with all of my marks. I can make my cuts, slide it down, and make my cuts working my way up the piece. And since I'm doing sets, I could just swap out the pieces. As of right now, there's no front or back on this, but there is going to be a top and a bottom. So basically that's all that is. The bottom of this one cabinet has a drawer, so that's what those tiny dados are at the bottom. Not far apart, I should say, not necessarily tiny. And then working my way up are all the shelves, which are spaced equal distance apart. If you want to get equal distance apart on shelves, just remember to calculate the thickness of the plywood into your calculations. Otherwise, one of your openings will be much smaller than the others without calculating that opening. But as you can see, pretty simple stuff. When I've been building them like this for a while, I'm going about 3/8 of an inch into that ply, and I could just keep moving my marker down and cut all of these in one go. So that is what the shelving dados are going to look like. I always like to kind of put my sets together and make sure the dados align front to back, because if they don't, it's one of those things, especially on a paint grade project like this, if it's off by a hair, I could bring it back to the saw, make sure it lines up, and then when I glue it together, I can just patch any sort of gap that's in place. And then, like I said, this other unit is built the same way, but different spacing, so I cut that one separately. So at this point now, I'm going to go through and put the backer on. If you're doing it this way, just make sure you have your boards oriented almost like a book when you're doing your markings, because you don't want if you send all of your pieces through the same way, you're going to end up with a dado on either the right hand side or the left hand side, all on the back, and you won't have matching pieces. So basically, as you can see, one of my sides I'm sending through with the top first, and then the second piece I'll send through with the bottom first, and that will mean that I'll have a rabbet on the backhand left-hand side and a rabbet on the backhand right-hand side. Whenever I show building cabinets like this, I always make a point of saying that. When I first started woodworking, I sent a bunch of pieces through the same way, and it's a real bummer when you do that, is the simplest way to put it. So I always make a note of lining these up so it's easy to see, especially when you're sending through a bunch of pieces. It's easy to get them flipped and swapped, and it can be a little confusing, so I line them up, and as you can see, top through first on one side, bottom through first on the other, and then that gives me that perfect groove so they can mate in the back. And as you can see, obviously these are laying flat, but if you flip them on the side, you'll see that now that rabbet is going to be on the back of both of those pieces. And then obviously the shelves. So now these, like I said, they're going to have doors, so the math for this gets a little confusing. I'm putting a face frame on this entire thing. The groove is about a little over a quarter, it's like 5/16 of an inch, so I have to calculate that into the front. But because I'm putting doors on these, which are inset, it means all of my shelves have to also then be inset so that the doors can close. So that is what those double marks are for, and I use scrap to calculate all that. I'm marking where the poplar face frame is going to come as well as the tongue, and then you saw with that math I got the thickness of my shelves, so I could send all this through. This piece probably used up the most plywood I've ever used on a single job. I think I was almost at like 15 sheets of 3/4 inch ply. I happen to have this sheet of oak in the shop. Because there's going to be doors on this, I decided to use this oak just to get rid of it. I already had it. If you're building something like this is going to be paint grade, so obviously the grain will be hidden a little bit, but oak ply will show the grain. So on shelves like this with doors closed, it won't really matter, but on parts where I did use it on some of the drawers, once I have the primer on, I did have to go through and fill some of the grain with some joint compound. It's not that big of a deal, but it is something to note if you don't like the look of visible grain. And then, like I said, because I used so much ply on this, I was running out. I didn't want to have to go buy a whole new sheet. So on the bottom where the drawer is, you'll never see this shelf. So I just joined two pieces together to make up the bottoms. It saved having to go buy another sheet of ply, save the customer money because it's scrap from this project. And then this is what my shelves look like dry fit together. You can see the shelves on the bottom are going to come to the front, but the shelves up top are inset. That will make a little bit more sense once you see the face frame in place. And then once I have that one cabinet put together, I could just pull measurements right off of the project in order to get that smaller open shelving unit. Just find it's easier to do it that way. The drawing on the computer wasn't fully fleshed out, so at this point I'm mostly doing measurements from measuring off of what I have. Pretty simple, same concept like I said, just not as wide. Pop everything into place. Like I said, one of the reasons I spend the time to do it this way is not only do I find them to be stronger, but fitting everything together, especially when you're one person, is much easier with this sort of joinery because it holds itself together. So then this is just a small cabinet. And once I had that up and dry fit, I could go through and cut my backers. Those are the measurements for the backers. Obviously the two are for the wider cabinets and then the one for the shorter cabinet. Wider cuts on my table saw, I end up just measuring the negative, and that's what I'll cut because obviously my fence is not going to go to whatever it was, 38 inches or what have you, and then I could just rip this down to size with my circular saw. So on this one, the backer didn't come all the way to, I didn't have enough to do a full piece, which is fine. All I'm doing is I'm making sure the seam is on the back side of the shelf so you'll never see it. So that's a way to get around buying a whole nother sheet of 1/2 inch just for that little piece as well. So now that the dry fit's done, before I glue this together, the last thing I have to do is add the tongue to the entire front face of my piece. It's best to do this all at once. I could dial it in. You could see I could dial it in with my scrap, and then I could send all my pieces through, so when I make my face frame, everything fits perfectly because that tongue is exactly the same on all of my pieces. So it's just a dado stack in there. Like I said, it's about a 15/16 inch tongue, and I'm flipping the piece, so I'm removing the same amount of material on both sides, and that will give me a perfectly centered tongue. There's many ways to attach a face frame. Sometimes I do floating splines. Sometimes I do this tongue and groove. I used to use biscuits. I prefer not to do it that way. One, because I hate having to buy consumables. It's a pain. I usually forget, and then I don't have them when I need them. I also don't like biscuits because if you watch this channel, you know I like to dry fit stuff and make adjustments before I final glue things together, and biscuits don't stay the same way that a full spline does. They kind of wobble around. There's a little bit of give in the groove, so I just find the splines are better for the way that I work. But like I said, to each your own. If you don't want to do these grooves, you can do biscuits, you can do pocket screws. Those work for face frames as well. So then once I had that tongue on all of my pieces, you could see I could glue this together. Everything snaps in place because of all the joinery. The backer is going to help square this up. I could pop in the top, flip this over, measure my diagonals for square. These cabinets squared up pretty nicely. That's not always the case, but these squared up pretty nicely. Once that's square, I'm going to screw the backer in place, and all I'm doing for that is just putting a couple chalk lines on there, snap the lines, and then can glue the backer in place. I didn't have enough clamps to do all these at once, so like the base cabinets, you're only going to see two edges of this. The rest of it's going to be forever hidden by either walls, ceilings, or the other cabinet parts. So I will have to patch those, but like I said, I don't have enough clamps, and I'm a little impatient with stuff like this. I like gluing everything together at once. And then I could kind of prove that this tabletop is nice and sturdy, get on top of it and put all these cabinets in place. So there is basically what that looks like. At this point, I just have to add the face frames. So what I did was I went through and I made a rough list. You could see some of the face frames are going to be 2 inches, some 1.25 inches, some 1.5 inches, and some 3/4. I made a rough cut list. The rough part is the length. The thickness is going to stay the same. I have a stack of poplar, and I'm just going to cut all those pieces you saw on the paper. These will get a groove that will fit over the tongue. Some of these, the groove is in the same spot. A couple pieces it's not. So basically I'm just going to rip all of my pieces, do a test fit to get that original groove, and then for the parts I have to change, I can just move my fence as I go. So it looks like a lot of work, but I just prefer to do it this way, and it really isn't that much extra work. So like I said, I have a test piece here. I'm just using a scrap piece of ply to try and get it perfect. I can mark where that tongue is, and then in the dado stack I have a 1/4 inch, because like I said, this groove is about a 1/4 inch thick, about 15/16 inch deep, and I can just dial in that fit. I'm really looking for it to be flush up top so I don't have a lot of sanding to do, and then I could go through and cut all the rails for the inner portion of that cabinet. So usually I do the stiles first, but the way that this cabinet's built, I had to do the inner rails first because the stiles will overhang this cabinet, and it would be almost impossible to do it if I did the stiles first. So for the shelves, like I believe there's 3 in here. I could go through. I had these all rough cut to length. I can measure and pop them in place. You can see these almost snap in place, which I like. It holds itself together. Now these are thick because these cabinets are pretty wide, so this face frame is also doubling as a runner, which will help from that plywood bowing over time, which is why this inner face frame is so thick. It's basically a face frame runner. Sometimes these are mounted underneath the ply, but putting it on the face like this means I don't have to edge band the front. Kind of kills multiple birds with one stone. You can see the tops are pretty much perfect, and then I did give myself a little bit of gap between the inner face frame and the outer face frame. That is just because inset doors need some space on the inside. I didn't want them to not be flush because they were hitting those inner shelves. And then my stiles for the most part are the same. Any place that I'm putting these where one edge is flush with the ply will all get the groove cut the same way. So the groove on the style I'm doing now is the same groove set up for the shelves. Now when I'm going over here, you can see I had to remove some material on the tongue because these stiles are 2 inches to match the stiles on the bottom, so they actually overlap the cabinet on this side quite a bit. So I just had to remove those with a chisel. Pretty easy work with plywood, and then once again just start snapping my pieces into place. And now you can see what I meant by the inner and outer face frame, because this now style is where the doors are going to be mounted to. So that is pretty much what that looks like. Once again, when I'm joining 2 cabinets, I just do a double spline. This will come off so I could transport these and then in the space be permanently attached. So that is what that looks like. The 2 edges are permanently attached. I didn't love the idea of having to move these because of the doors, but it is what it is. Then on this edge, that side's flush. This one will be detachable so I could scribe it to the space, and I have an overhang to account for walls not being square. And then same thing on this other side. It overhangs the cabinet, but I also gave myself about a 1/2 inch material in order to scribe it onto the space. And this one is also removable. So 3 of these stiles are removable in order to scribe them when I'm in the space. And then obviously framing out the drawer, it's the same thing, just cutting those pieces and popping them into place. And then you could see the shelving on the other side. What I meant by the shelf spacing was different, and those are 3/4 inch pieces on the front. So that is basically what that face frame looks like. The next video should be the last video. I'm going to show you how I make the doors for this. Those are kind of rough layout. I have a little bit of footage from the install, not a ton, which I never usually do for these.